Welcome to Lecture 6 of the Pentateuch. This lecture will cover Part 1 of our study in the book of Exodus. As we already discussed, the author of the book of Exodus is none other than the person Moses. The theme of the book of Exodus is the children of Israel are delivered from Egyptian bondage. Roman numeral 1. There is a new Pharaoh in Egypt. Letter A. The new Pharaoh makes the children of Israel serve the Egyptians. We are now introduced to a new king in Egypt that the Bible says did not know Joseph. The reason for this new Pharaoh not knowing who Joseph was is most likely because it was a different Egyptian dynasty. In fact, they were not even Egyptians. This people group was known as the Hyksos. The Hyksos outgrew the Egyptians and eventually overtook them. So, they thought the Jews would do the same thing to them. Interestingly, everything they tried just caused the people of Israel to grow larger and larger. This is what causes the king to do letter B. Letter B. Pharaoh sentences all newborn Hebrew males less than 2 years of age to death. Originally, the midwives were commanded to kill the newborns, but they refused. They actually lied about it by saying that Hebrew women gave birth too quickly, so they couldn't get there in time to kill the babies. But the Lord still blessed the midwives in spite of that. So, the Pharaoh gave an order that all newborn Hebrew males would be cast alive into the river. Roman numeral 2. A Levite named Moses is born. Letter A. Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses and adopts him. Moses was hidden for 3 months after his birth and then placed in a river where the daughter of Pharaoh would find him. Ironically, his sister Miriam fetched his own mother to nurse Moses for the Pharaoh's daughter, and she got paid for it. The daughter of Pharaoh named the boy Moses, meaning drawn out. The identity of this individual has raised the most debate amongst theologians. A late date of the Exodus would make Moses' brother, the assumed Pharaoh of the Exodus, Ramesses. However, an earlier date seems to fit the chronology of the Hebrew Old Testament. This would make Moses' mother a lady named Hatshepsut. Her father would have been Thutmose I, who married her to her half-brother, Thutmose II. This would make Thutmose III and stepson to Hatshepsut, Pharaoh of the Exodus. Letter B. Moses kills an Egyptian. At some point while Moses was an adult, and after understanding that he was in fact a Hebrew, he noticed an Egyptian beating one of his people, so he killed him. Premeditated, I might add, since the Bible says that he looked this way and that way before taking his life. The next day, he confronted 2 Hebrews arguing and tried to stop them, but was met with their contention and the accusation that he would kill one of them. Because of Pharaoh wanting to kill Moses for his act, Moses, letter C, flees from Egypt. But, letter D, Moses marries Zipporah. Moses met Zipporah when he was protecting her and her 6 sisters from a group of men. They brought him to meet their father, Reuel, also known as Jethro, and he gave him Zipporah to marry. They then had a son named Gershom, whose name means a stranger there. During this time, the Bible says that the Pharaoh died while Moses was in the land of Midian. Roman numeral 3. God meets with Moses. Letter A. God, in the burning bush, calls Moses to deliver the children of Israel. While taking care of his father-in-law's flock, Moses noticed a bush burning but not being consumed. When he got to the place where it was, the Lord told him to remove his shoes because of the holy ground he was stepping on. God then revealed to Moses that he had heard the cries of his people and would deliver them from Egypt and give them the land of Canaan. Moses reasoned with God that he was no one, but God promised to be with him and revealed that I am had sent Moses. He also revealed that Pharaoh would not listen to him, so he would have to smite Egypt. So, letter B, the Lord proves himself to Moses. Number 1, he turns Moses' rod into a snake. After Moses told God that no one would believe him, God instructed Moses to cast his rod to the ground, which then turned into a snake and back into a rod again when Moses picked it up. Then secondly, God turns Moses' hand leprous. God then told Moses to put his hand into his coat, and it came out leprous, and then put it back in, and it would come out clean. Moses then explained to God that he was not an eloquent speaker, but God declared that he himself was in charge of his mouth, so he should not worry. Moses again complained and asked who would go with him, and the Lord became angry and said that his brother Aaron would help him. After this, Moses asked for leave from Jethro and took his family toward Egypt. But, letter C, the Lord almost kills Moses. Interestingly, while traveling from Midian to Egypt, the Lord was actually going to kill Moses. But because Zipporah circumcised one of her sons, the Lord's anger was pacified. Since she calls Moses a bloody husband, and only one son is said to be circumcised here, it is assumed that the older son was already circumcised. But they did not do so to the younger because of either his mother's protesting or Moses' aversion to obeying Hebrew tradition at this point. After this, God then told Aaron to meet Moses in the wilderness, and they delivered the message and signs from God to the people, and they believed. Roman numeral 4, Moses meets with Pharaoh. Letter A, Pharaoh increases the work of the Hebrews. After Moses and Aaron met with Pharaoh to tell him to let the Hebrews go, Pharaoh commanded that they would now have to collect their own straw to make the bricks, but the workload would remain the same. Because of this, letter B, God reconfirms his plan to Moses. In response to the people's complaining to Moses about the hard work and the beatings they were receiving from the Egyptian, Moses prayed to the Lord, and he confirmed again to Moses that he will deliver them from the Pharaoh. Letter C, the Lord plagues Egypt. Number 1, Aaron's rod turns into a serpent in front of Pharaoh. When Moses was 80 and Aaron 83, Aaron cast his rod in front of Pharaoh, and it became a snake. When the sorcerers counterfeited this miracle, Aaron's snake ate all of theirs. Secondly, the water turns into blood. In response to Pharaoh's heart being hardened, Moses smote the waters in the river. Aaron stretched his rod and hands above the water, and it turned into blood, causing the fish to die and the water to stink. Interestingly, the magicians of Egypt were actually able to counterfeit this plague. Now, concerning the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, we will find out that his heart is hardened 12 times. 6 times by the Lord, and 6 times by Pharaoh himself. Thirdly, frogs, lice, and flies infest the land. After another unsuccessful attempt to free the Hebrews, Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters, and frogs came out of them. The magicians were able to counterfeit this plague as well. Pharaoh eventually asked Moses to ask the Lord to remove the frogs, and after they were all gathered up dead, his heart was hardened again. This time Aaron smote the dust of the land, and there were lice. However, this time the magicians were not able to counterfeit this plague. This made Pharaoh's heart even more hardened, so the Lord brought a swarm of flies. Pharaoh finally then gives in, although temporarily, and tells them to go serve their Lord for 3 days. This causes the swarm of flies to be removed. Number 4. Livestock disease, boils, and hail infest the land. After Pharaoh again refused to let the Hebrews go, the Lord brought disease upon the livestock, except upon the livestock of the Hebrews. Pharaoh's heart was hardened again, and Moses and Aaron took ashes, sprinkled them in the air, and boils appeared upon the people. The next day, hail began raining upon the land, except in the land of Goshen where the Hebrews were, because Pharaoh still would not let them go. Fifthly, locusts and darkness infest the land. Moses and Aaron went back to Pharaoh and threatened a mass invasion of locusts if he wouldn't humble himself and let them go. Pharaoh inquired as to whom would go. After Moses said everyone, Pharaoh replied, "No, only the men." This reaction of Pharaoh caused the Lord to bring locusts upon the land, and they devoured all the vegetation. Pharaoh begged Moses to stop the plague and forgive him of his sin. So the Lord sent a strong wind to drive the locusts into the Red Sea. Unfortunately, the Pharaoh would not let the people go. So the Lord brought darkness upon the land for 3 days, except in the homes of the Hebrews. This caused Pharaoh to tell Moses that he would let everyone go, but they must leave their livestock behind. However, Moses reasoned that they needed the livestock for sacrifice. This caused the Lord to harden Pharaoh's heart again, and he would not let them go. Number 6. God informs Moses that there will be one more plague. God told Moses that he was going to bring one more plague upon the Egyptians that would be so severe it would cause wailing upon the entire country. That plague would be the death of the firstborn of all men and beasts. Moses was then told to tell the people to borrow all they could from the Egyptians, because they were going to be thrust out of Egypt quickly after this last plague. On account of the favor that they had with the Egyptians, they were able to gather a huge amount of silver and gold jewelry. Number 7. The firstborn of man and beast are killed unless the houses contain the blood of the lamb on the doorposts. God tells Moses to have all the Hebrew families take a spotless lamb and kill it in 4 days. After eating all of the lamb and getting clothed to leave, they were to take the blood from the lamb and apply some of the blood to the top and sides of the door. This would be so that when the Lord went through the cities, he would not kill any of their firstborn. Remember, it was the Lord who went through and did this, not an angel of death, as so commonly taught. God then gives them instruction for observance of this event every year, which becomes known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And finally, number 8, Pharaoh lets the Hebrews go. The final plague was said to have transpired at midnight and even affected Pharaoh's firstborn son. This caused him to tell the Hebrews to take everything they had and leave. The Bible then records that this was 430 years after the Hebrews arrived in Egypt. That brings us to the end of Lecture 6 and Part 1 of the Exodus.